But really, welcome to you all to this session on IPM, and really having a good conversation about how we can derive the benefits from IPM.
Fiona, would you, sorry to interrupt, would you like me to shut off my camera and work away in the background?
I'll get on to my housekeeping, Henry.
Apologies.
But yeah, no, that key point actually, the setup and hop-in is slightly complicated. That most people will join through the Q&A function and can just take part by typing their questions there. Some of you will have the ability to view and interact live if you so wish. Henry, you're kind of sitting awkwardly between those two stools because you're going to help me facilitate the questions. But yes, I think cameras off if we let the panellists pitch, and then you get the biggest rather than trying to look at postage stamps. Well, that's interesting, Henry. Actually, you remain as just a still image, so it doesn't help the size of anybody's screen. So feel free to come back live. Yes, so that was the start of my housekeeping. If you are, though, just keep mute if you're part of the live session, but not actually contributing at that point. Very warm welcome. I'll introduce my panellists, but really pleased to have Andrew Moir, Caroline Drummond and David Howard with me today. The session is being recorded. I'm obliged to tell you that, so you can moderate whatever you wish to moderate. And yes, as I've said, please use the Q&A function to enter your questions, and that will make it more straightforward. You also have the ability there to like other people's questions. So if one comes up that you would have asked, give us a thumbs up on that. And then at the end of the session, there'll be a feedback form. So we'll pop the link for the feedback form in the chat, in the Q&A. And then rather sneakily, the basis and the Roseau points are attached to the end of that form so that you have to do the feedback form to get your points. So yeah, I'm really hoping, really keen to encourage just a good conversation about IPM. There's so many aspects and so many things that within Scotland, might give us opportunities or might make things hard for us. So this is your chance to really, question and have a good conversation about that. As I've said, I've got Caroline Drummond with us, so really pleased to have you, Caroline. So Caroline, obviously, CEO of LEAF. So that brings in the enhanced IPM, and probably very key to what we're talking about today, how we derive benefits. Similarly, very pleased to have Andrew Moir. So obviously, Andrew will bring his practical farming perspective here, but chair of SQC Limited. And I mean, I worked with Andrew when Andrew was chairing one of the farmer-led groups on climate change. So again, that piece, we've got lots of issues we're pulling together here. And then finally, I've got David Howard from Hutchinsons. So thank you for joining as well, David. And David obviously heads up their integrated farm management, but also, kind of bringing that expertise on some of the novel tools and novel approaches that we might be able to bring. So I've asked my panel just to speak from the heart, no slides, just a pitch, giving what they think the key issues are, or, the key pieces that they really want to be questioned on. And then we'll open it up to everybody. So you can pop questions in as they're talking or save them to the end. I think if I can just, by way of introduction, my own take on IPM, I think this season is yet another one that illustrates how vulnerable we are in some of our systems. So yet again, we're dealing with Ian, do you mind muting? Because I think I'm getting feedback now.
Oh, sorry.
It may or may not be you. I've presumed and tuned you. I don't know why it's suddenly feeding back.
Does that help?
If everybody mutes, that's perfect, thank you. There's nothing worse than hearing your own voice. I feel for the rest of you. But yes, this season, where yet again we're dealing with an exceptionally dry spring. We've had very low disease levels, but then niggles of kind of new variants of rust. So it's kind of what we can do to adjust our systems and our inputs. I see kind of positive drivers. I think we'll get on to kind of how we can link to climate change drivers. We've obviously got issues around losing some of our pesticide tools. You could class that as a positive or a negative in how we're changing our systems. But we know we've got lots of tools that we can use to reduce pest disease and weed risk, and there's loads of information on the Arable Scotland site about some of the research. Varieties, timings, different products, rates of products, timings of products, how they work in fertilizers, how plant nutrition links to plant health, so on and so forth. But really, how we can put that together in Scottish systems and bring some of that new stuff to play would be some of what I would like to unpick. It's quite ambitious in an hour, I know. And the other piece I was going to mention was, we're now in the first season of having IPM planning tools that allow us to score farms and have metrics on farms. And for me, there are positive stories in that. So we know that Scottish farmers are already doing quite a lot and scoring kind of between the 60 and 85%. And we also know that some of those high scoring farms are the ones that, seek primary source information. They come to things like Arable Scotland and they really look for the new information. But how can we, how helpful are those plans? Keen to hear about that. And what can we do to kind of improve the knowledge sources and keep moving forward on IPM. So that's more than enough for me. I strictly told everyone else to stick to 2 or 3 minutes and have probably run over myself. If I start with Caroline, if that's okay, and then Andrew, and then you, David, and let us say just a 2 or 3 minute pitch and what you would really like us to chew into today, Caroline. Thank you.
So thank you very much indeed, Fiona, and great to be here. I'm going to just really quickly pitch about the importance of integrated pest management. Obviously, one of the great things as an organisation, we're just celebrating 30 years of integrated farm management. Always bring a nice little prop along with me, but that IFM bit of which integrated pest management is such a core part for crop health. Early 1950s was when IPM was kind of first thought of as a concept, and it is only now really, and hats off to the James Hutton Institute, a lot of work in protected cropping and soft fruits, but it's a harder ask when it comes into the larger scale field perspective. And I think what for us has been really important is framing that. It's basically good agronomy at the end of the day, and we've developed a series of tools like the Simply Sustainable tools. And within that, seeing integrated pest management very much a cornerstone of IFM. And within the toolbox is particularly looking at a series of principles. So preventing and suppressing the build-up of harmful organisms, monitoring pest populations and forecasting the impact, use of thresholds, determining what and when to intervene, considering all options, and that's obviously your physical, your biological, and your chemical options, and then selecting the appropriate interventions and all the associated risks with that. Minimizing chemical intervention by maximizing the efficiency of application. And boy, when the days when I was sort of pre-college and at college doing sprayer operating back in the 80s, the technology's changed so dramatically, and particularly nozzle technology. And I'm sure David will probably talk a little bit more about this, but that spray depth, that application depth is really key. And then strategizing to prevent the build-up of resistance in pest populations, and then reviewing the success, revisit, plan, assess, revisit, and develop. And so integrated pest management as a framework, we know now through Leaf Mark, we're seeing 45% of UK fruit and veg is Leaf Mark certified. And of that, some 46% are doing all 8 elements of the integrated pest management strategy. And it's not an easy ask, because it is about, it's intelligent management. It's about utilizing agronomy, but it's also utilizing and integrating your machinery and of course your cropping rotations, etc. So just as a sort of a starting point, I think all of these things are really important. They're important from your point of view as a farmer. They're important as evidence for government about doing, you mentioned, Fiona, about monitoring and the importance of metrics and that this is what I'm doing the right thing. And saying when I'm not spraying, because these are the steps that I've taken, and saying the steps when I have sprayed. And then right through to the marketplace with that huge pull, all of Waitrose, fresh fruit and veggies, Leaf Mark certified. Other retailers are, really in that space. Marks and Spencer's as part of their Plan A attribute. And interestingly, as a global standard now operating in 21 countries, Walmart in the USA have actually just approved Leaf Mark as an assurance scheme for a system for growers for their integrated pest management practices as a requirement as well. So I think, this is the opportunity as we are in a situation of trade and a situation of evidence. We are doing some really good things. Scotland have got some, huge research infrastructure and some really smart agronomy. So now is the opportunity to kind of herald that and move forward. Thank you.
That's great, Caroline. Thank you. And actually, you raised a nice point there about how we sort of record when we don't apply a spray. We monitor very carefully when we do take an action, but where we've managed to take steps that reduce an input. I might come back to that one. Andrew, do you want to give us a couple of minutes from your angle? And your angles are many, so pick your favourite.
First of all, thank you for inviting me, Fiona. It's always dangerous to follow someone so eloquent as Caroline Drummond, which manages to steal just everything that I've written down. So I'll bring you back online fairly quickly, I'm sure. I'm just a simple farmer. It's a bit of a field getting a sort of the syndrome of imposter syndrome in this panel, being with such eloquent people. But from my point of view, everything is quite relatively simple. We just need to be. Every farmer is practicing IPM methodology every day, really, but we don't record it, and that was what you was alluding to, Caroline, and I'm sure we'll come to that, and I'm sure David will have something to say about that, because I've a few ideas on that, but it's also the burden of red tape as well, which I've got to be very careful of. Now, I mean, IPM, the heart of the approach lies in the principles of balancing the economic and environmental and social aspects of agriculture to have a more resilient business, if you like, and to get a margin as well. We have to have a profit. I mean, it's not a bad word. We do need to make a margin at this job with all the pressures that we have upon us. But I was, as Fiona said, I was the chair of the Agricultural Climate Change Group, which reported to government. We're still waiting on what they're going to say to that. I'm not telling tales out of school. I was speaking to Mary 15 minutes ago, saying that the troops are getting a wee bit itchy. We're in a big cycle here. We're needing to get to know where we are, but she's taking her time because she's going to try and make a job of it. So I'm hopeful that our report is looked at. I mean, I hope you've all read the report, everybody on the call. It's only 25 pages, and there's a few people on the thing today who are part of that. So please take time to read that. And the IPM principles are made clear there, as is our relationship, hopefully, with LEAF and all this, to make this work and make it manageable so that government can see, and the audit is there, that we're doing everything. And of course, it's a statutory requirement that we've got to get to this zero job. As chair of SQC, IPM and biodiversity have been a requirement of our scheme for a number of years, and Henry and Fiona, they updated it recently, which made it actually, I think, more workable and more usable for farmers and more relevant to look at where we are and see what we need to do to change on that. It's good for business, but also it's a route to market as well for having your SQC audit. I get a lot of grief from farmers say, oh, we don't get due sort of recognition for what we do. Well, isn't it really, haven't we got something there with the SQC audit and with the LEAF mark stuff and those things and the IPM stuff we do, that we have a really good story to tell, and we should be shouting this a bit more from the rooftops. And But the grief I got for putting IPM biodiversity into that standards was severe. I still have the bruises, ladies and gentlemen, I can tell you. But we've been proven to be true, that we needed to do these things. And I think most farmers actually recognise that now. Now, I'm going well off script now, Fiona. I'm going way past the 2 minutes. But there's no absolute measures in what constitutes a good performance within an IPM. And everyone has to draw up their own plans on their own turf, so to speak, to get their own targets, to make their own decisions. There's no one thing fits all. So for economic and environmental stuff, auditing process against targets, etc., and the priorities for action. So as you said, Fiona, plenty to get on with, but it requires a commitment, a real commitment from everyone in all this. So hence this today, I suppose. So thank you, Fiona.
That's perfect, Andrew. Yes, lots to talk about there, and I think a few common threads already coming through. David, do you want to give us a pitch and then we'll dive into the questions?
Indeed, yes. Again, thank you for being invited. I think, Andrew, if you had less to say, I think I've had even less now with what you two have both talked about, but it's good that we're all on the same sort of hymn sheet. I really like IPM, I think, because what's great about it is it's already being practiced by farmers, as Andrew said. It's already being done. I think what is clear is there's a big spectrum of ICM approaches, and what will fit to each farm is going to be very different based on its history and its approach and its business needs. So ICM is quite a broad church, but I think, as others have mentioned, I think it's critical. The critical bit is that as an industry, we haven't been great at shouting about it, particularly to consumers, about the fact that for most agronomists, they are doing ICM in their daily life, farmers the same. We just haven't been great at writing down those decision points and what we've been doing with that. And I guess one of the difficulties with IPM across the farming system is often it's very targeted at specific areas. So that might be blackgrass IPM, that might be weeds, pests, etc. And arguably out there, when we're dealing with crops, we're dealing with systems approaches. So it's trying to optimize those and avoid the law of unintended consequences, which can be a feature of ICM. Really to just try and optimize that rotation to make sure that all the crops are performing adequately. And I think it's becoming more difficult with vagaries of the weather. I think others have mentioned loss of actives, changes to legislation. It's becoming very difficult to reduce risk on farm, and that is really where I see ICM or IPM coming in, is reducing risk to the grower. It won't reduce it completely. It will change where the risk lies, probably. I think with farmers are fairly used to, we deal with the weather, so we can only reduce risk so far. And obviously a blueprint approach isn't going to work across every single farm, but what I think is the biggest change, if you like, to how practicable IPM might be is the arrival of new technology. And it's come at the perfect time to support ICM decisions. There's a potential for ICM and new technology to be better than the sum of their parts, I feel. Whether that is in supporting planning, using models, predicting yields, that sort of thing. Whether that's in season management, like pest and weed models, coupled with things like spore trapping and sensors, to evaluate how successful we've been as well, being able to utilize yield data and capture the effect of our changes and then address those and change them. So it's a really important part of IPM that we perhaps haven't been as good at seeing, because for me, the new technology just allows us to visualize the risk better. If we look at the last couple of years, spectrums of drilling dates, because of the weather, various varieties across a farm, how do you keep track of where your risk lies? And I think that is where new technology can really support some of those areas. And then my really final point is, when I talk about new technology, I don't necessarily just mean IT and sprayers and things like that. I would call novel approaches technologies. So whether that is multi-story cropping, blends is now becoming quite a hot topic on farm at the moment, around blending varieties, living mulches, companion crops. It's fantastic. It's really exciting areas of agriculture at the moment. So I think it's really good that we're having this discussion. I think it's relevant to now. I think risk is becoming more a part of farming in an unsupported future, if you like. And these are ways where we can just help reduce that level of risk. So I think ICM is going to be essential in that.
That's great, Dave. So that's set out a huge stall of IPM that we can start discussing. I'm going to be polite and ask the question that's come in the Q&A, and then I've got other questions that are bubbling up too. So one here for you, Caroline, which I think actually you can all talk to as well, but I'll start with you, Caroline, about how LEAF is tracking carbon sequestration moving forward. So I think that piece about, for all of us, where we think the future direction of IPM is going is an interesting one to pick up. But maybe start with that.
Yes, certainly. And I think, it goes back to this sort of something that really David was alluding to, which is the importance of the framing of all of this. So carbon is part of that framing. It's one critical area. And for us, in terms of the carbon sequestration piece, highly complex. I think this is going to be an interesting perspective. It's like there's a little saying, the second mouse gets the cheese. I think this is going to be the real case in this situation. But one thing we are doing is, and we've done this since, well, actually probably about 1999 when there was a huge change. So we've been tracking information since 93 when we first developed the LEAF audit. Carbon copy document technology now has changed, whiz interactive. In 99, our energy efficiency of our farmers and our members kind of went from really good to not good. It was a great indication that farmers answer the questions really honestly, but also it was because there was an introduction of a new technology in this space. So we were counting, how much electricity and diesel do you use? It then became, what are your renewables? And actually we're right back into this new area and new space when it comes to carbon sequestration, understanding it. And so ultimately from a farmer's point of view, that's going to be, how do I stop using fossil fuels? And it may be because there'll be a change in how we manufacture fertilizers. It may be people reduce and improve their nutrient use efficiency, etc. Or it may be that we all have hydrogen tractors and electric tractors. But for us, in terms of the movement of that, how we're tracking it, we have since 2006 encouraged our farmers to be using a carbon footprinting tool. There's a wonderful bit of work that SRUC have done in this area. I think there are 67 carbon footprinting tools, and it's making sure that you use one and you stick with it. But again, something that David's just alluded to there, there's new ways of understanding how we can measure organic matter and soil health. We all have different soil types right across, across Scotland, right across the UK. So first of all, it's get a tool that works. We are now working, we've got a particular project looking at nature-based solutions in this very area, and we're using AgriCalc. So again, it's a Scottish tool. I think it's a really grounded one. I think you guys would all be very honest that it's not perfect. And the thing is, make it start, and also be consistent with the people that are testing your soil, because that's been a great trick for some of the farmers. You suddenly realize, if I change to this person, my soil organic matter has increased dramatically. So it's consistency, understanding, and then looking at the nuances. What are the levers that will drive change from my particular business?
Mm-hmm. Do you see, there's kind of many ways to count benefits. So Andrew listed, there's efficiencies, there's the kind of added value. But do you see this actually adding value to your members' produce, or are the added benefits here more about the environmental benefits? And that leads me to where policy might go.
I think it has to be at many levels, because now is the opportunities for farmers to get more rewards for the good, for the great things they're doing, that delivery of public goods, the embedded carbon, the care and attention to improved management. But therein lies, the real challenge. It's slightly like the gold rush at the moment, but not what gold looks like. And so I think, this is going to be, seriously, really critical that farmers' worth is measured. I know from the discussions we've had with our members, persistence, how long is this? Am I trading my life away? Am I trading 3 years away? What happens if, weather changes, etc.? So I think there's a lot of questions to answer. I think the natural capital piece is critical. The opportunity for carbon offsetting, biodiversity offsetting is critical. But government is going to really need to be very cautious as to how the enabling legislation is framed in this area to make sure that farmers are not shortchanged in this area, because I think there's a huge amount of interest, every week a new organisation is doing something in this area.
Mm-hmm. And I better not dwell too much on carbon, because there's obviously a session at 6:00 tonight, which will deal with that specifically. But
Duncan Farrington's talking at that as well. One of our farmers, he's carbon huge. So he would be a really good person to ask on that as well.
Yeah, so we can follow up on that one. Obviously, Andrew, this was a kind of key piece in the Arable Climate Change Group, where we'll have to make efficiencies, and sequestration might be one of them. But it is leading to where we think policy might push us. Do you have a feel for the future direction there? We won't hold you to it.
Have a feel, but until we actually come out and say, we think that carbon is an important aspect in all of this. But I do worry as a farmer that Caroline's alluded to it, we will sell ourselves short. We must not see carbon disappear as sold, for instance, out with agriculture. And I know it's happening already. I heard a story last week that someone had sold stuff to some firm or other somewhere, but it changed nothing at home, so it changes nothing. If BP, for instance, or an airline can call themselves net zero on the back of agriculture or what we use on the land, that's criminal in my opinion, and that should be avoided at all costs. And I'm telling everybody who can listen that we not need to stop that and not allow that. But I'm afraid maybe the genie's out of the bottle. Scottish soils, I need to remember, Scottish soils are very high in organic matter. Mm-hmm. And it does worry me that when I see, for instance, Australia saying they've doubled their organic matter, for instance, and they're doing everything that's correct, and their government says that basically all their farmers are net zero. Well, I just have to laugh, because they're going from virtually nothing, to one, if at all. So if we were to try and double our organic matter, it would probably take the next 1,000 years, because we're already at such a high level. We can't just do something overnight. Things we can do, but I think government are wanting to encourage us to move towards that, using sustainable methods. And as I said, probably in my start, there is no one size fits all on this. There's no one thing is perfect for your farm or your land. But the baseline, the agriculture, it's a starting point. I think we need to have that starting point so we can show government where we are, and that it's not all bad. There is a lot of good stuff. As I say, if these guys can call themselves green, we're in a huge start. But hydrogen tractors, electric tractors we mentioned there. I think it was Caroline said, if we went to electric tractors or hydrogen tomorrow, if we could, we would be zero straight away. Forget the nitrous oxide and fertilizers, because we've used everything was used. Our tractors, trucks, etc. were all green. We would be in an extremely good place. And I think arable and horticulture, as we said in the report, are really part of the solution to an awful lot of the carbon issues.
Mm-hmm. No, and it's interesting there's a kind of the need to, the potential for these tools to be useful on individual farms. And I think that leads us into perhaps some of the challenges that we know make some options IPM-wise in Scotland harder than others. So, the scope to, alter your rotations might be limited by your soil type or the weather of where you're sitting. All options are not out there, but at least the metrics and the tools let you do the best you can on your farm. And if you can't pick, one option, you can at least try some of the others. And I might sort of point this one at you, David, then. So, I mean, what do you think some of the biggest barriers to uptake of IPM are on farms?
Yeah, I guess there's probably three that I can think of that are the really big ones. One of them is knowledge or understanding what are the options out there available to you. I think you hit the nail on the head with, we talk about rotations a lot, but feasibly there are only so many crops that we can grow on certain land types, certain markets, certain areas, etc. But then there are a whole host of options that are coming through, new technologies, new approaches that we might use. And I think the difficult part is then understanding those approaches and getting to grips with how they'll work, because as I think Andrew said, it's impossible to look over the fence and take your neighbour's approach. It just won't work because the history of farms are different. I think the other two key real big barriers that have always been there since ICM was sort of first talked around in the 80s is time. It takes a lot of time to follow ICM easily. Going back to look at fields, to assess your problem. Do you need to do anything? Go back again. You're not being prophylactic. You are purely reacting. And that has its challenges, particularly if you have a large farm and you have to get around it. There has to be a practical element to it. And I think technology is coming along to help with that. So I already mentioned it, but things like sensors and that sort of thing, which are going to be out there in the field doing a much more consistent job of monitoring and measuring than you might be doing going back and forth, are partly going to help with that. And then the last one is risk. We have to remember that going down a IPM approach does have risk. It has a different sort of risk, and hopefully we are getting more resilience from doing that. We aren't going to have a failure of a chemistry, a resistance, whatever, or at least we'll mitigate against that. But there are still risks to following that approach, and I think particularly where we've made a lot of investment in a crop and then the final decision comes up. So people often talk about things like sclerotinia as one of those where the decision to spray or not is probably a 30 or 40 pound decision, but it's risking a 2,000 pound investment, So it's that element of we really need to have trust in the tools to be able to make decisions off the back of them, and that will only come with time and investment in these areas to really sort of start to get to grips with how accurate we are. At the moment, it's I think personally, technology that we've got, models, etc., it's better than a finger in the air and assessing where we are in that sense. But we still need to move them on further. We need accuracy levels to go up for farmers and agronomists to take that plunge of putting their livelihoods on the line, essentially. I think Andrew said part of sustainable farming is profit. If you don't make a profit, you won't be sustainable for very long. So we do need to make sure that people are not exposed to huge amounts of risks, and that is going to be down a sort of, as I mentioned, planning and then through the system and really keeping track of your risk as you run through it.
Mm-hmm. No, I think you've raised some really key pieces there. So I'm interested in, how people make their decisions and how they think about risk. And I think you're very right that the more information you have that can inform your decisions, the better. I'm going to prime Henry to think about our information sources and how people get that. So I'll ask a couple of questions that are coming through in the Q&A and then maybe get back to that, Henry. I can always rely on Keith to ask something controversial. So what role does gene editing potentially play in IPM? I think your questions may be tailed off there, but I certainly have a piece here that however we move forward with tools like that, they shouldn't be, I think you referred to this as well, David, that we shouldn't keep our systems so simple that we just rely on individual tools, and that anything we do in this should be part of that integrated basket, so we don't just go through the same process of making and breaking things. I don't know if any of the other panelists want to wade into this space. Caroline?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. I mean, I think that's the crux of this. actually access to tools and technology is going to be really key. Our capability to not only employ and build nature-based solutions has to be done hand in hand with technology-based solutions. And I know obviously this is particularly controversial up in Scotland at the moment. But the reality is, gene editing or GM before that was not an alternative to good farming practices. It is one tool with the potential to ameliorate that. I mean, I think perhaps the bigger opportunity for gene editing is not necessarily just in the sort of where traditionally it's been utilized for resistance to pesticides in many crops. Actually, this is the nutritional benefits. And when you go globally, there are those nutritional benefits to human health. And I think, looking forward over the next 10 years, we're going to be framing food far more as a solution to better health. And, this is the real opportunity, but only by bringing consumers alongside hand in hand so that they recognize its acceptability. And for anybody, who's injecting themselves with insulin for diabetes in particular, they have recognized that benefit of gene editing, genetically modified organisms. So I think, it's controversial, but actually the opportunity for really trying to build the capability. As one of our farmers said the other day, I get it, the day that we knock the vitamin tablet businesses out of business is the day I've succeeded as a farmer, because my food is giving you health. And actually there are other nuances which we've seen it in vitamin A in Africa and things like that. So I think, and India on the rise. So there are some great opportunities in that space.
Yeah, thanks, Caroline. David?
Sorry, I'll wade in as well. I do think, aside from just the health benefits that you talk about, I think there are some fantastic potential benefits that we aren't really utilising at the moment, whether that is speeding up breeding so that we can meet some of these challenges quicker, because that is one of the big problems is, where we look to varieties and rotations to meet some of these challenges, we're always 4, 5, 6 years behind the next challenge. And some of this, I won't call it genetic engineering, because I find that one, it often gets pulled into the same thing, and they are slightly different. This is more talking about switching on and off genes that are already in the plant to maximize effect. Things like wheats that are able to tolerate these dry weathers that we're having, and wheats that are able to build extra yield in their 1,000 grain weight. There's a whole host of benefits that currently we don't get out of traditionally bred wheat that we might be able to, from an agronomic perspective, aside from, as you say, Caroline, I think in Australia they started putting more selenium into bred wheat for much the same reason, for health reasons. And I think that is how we probably should have always marketed GM, not purple tomatoes and Frankenstein foods. That's how we should have been looking at these things.
Yeah, that's never going to bring the public along. No, and I have an interest in, I think, the way our testing systems, our recommended lists and national lists have started to capture more some of the wider traits that we would want. But there's still, we run testing systems that are based around monocrops and quite conventional systems. So, can we bring forward varieties faster by whatever means that capture a broader range of traits? Right, you were a little shy with the questions, so they're now trickling in slightly faster.
So can I just quickly add something, Fiona?
Yeah,
and I think the other challenge, new technologies or new knowledge around epigenetics, interrelationship is this is whiz stuff, and the more that we can find out about this, the more we have the capability not only to address the sort of the agronomic aspects of the health aspect. We've got 10 years really to make a really good job of this. And we need to be accelerating change big time now. And with Scotland hosting COP, of course, these sort of things are really important conversations.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I can come in, maybe, Fiona, I think politically it's good that we're having a conversation with our politicians now, which wasn't always the case. Europe's even discussing it. Our colleagues in England are definitely looking like they're heading more in that way. And I think it would be really dangerous if we take a different sort of course of action than our English colleagues, because it would make a two-tier market or have real problems there. So, but is it not always been the case that we've been able to speak to I've personally tackled over the last 10, 15 years politicians on the subject, and they wouldn't even discuss it with me, but they are now. So we've got to embrace that and thing. But we've got a big selling point to our politicians, but we've got, and was alluded to earlier, a really big selling point to our customer. If our customer's not happy, then we can't really go on down that line if even much as we want to. But so we have agriculture. Scottish agriculture has got a real task to persuade and let everybody see that what we're doing is nutritious. It is good stuff, and get rid of these vitamins, as you suggesting. Really good stuff there. But I was just looking up the HDB stuff there. There's one of the mycotoxin risk maps, which is an IPM tool we can use. They're going off the scale, I think, the last few days because of the amount of rain they're having at this moment down in England. So it's a real live IPM decision tool that's giving agronomists, I think, in the south of England, but it's always been a problem in Scotland because we get the real variance in the weather, and mycotoxin in wheat can be a real problem for us, as most people know. And what a lot of people forget is that many, not that many years ago, people used to die of mycotoxins in their bread, etc. That basically unheard of now. And I think that because of the PPPs that we use, we're good chemistry, which helps to prevent that, especially in our part of the world. So those sort of things definitely don't want to be forgetting that we are actually doing an awful lot at the moment to prevent problems with people's health.
No, and you're right, Andrew. Probably some of those benefits get lost. And I think it's a nice example where actually there is help with a decision-making process as well. So there's a bit of science sitting there that helps talk you through how you make a decision. And we don't have that for every pest or disease.
Well, I think the problem we probably have now in England is it's all flowered past the point where they can economically do it. So, but it's at least it's a tool for looking forward and what they can do to mitigate it next year. But that's part of the process as well. Sorry, Fiona.
Yeah. No, we've had a couple of questions come in that I might package together. So, beginning to think about mixed farms and incorporating muck into land, and certainly we've seen the benefit in some of the drier seasons of the higher organic matters that you've already referred to. I'll not get into whether we need more cows or less, but maybe, any thoughts there, Andrew, about
well, I think it's part of the good animals as part of the circle. I know that from my own experiences. The animals are, if you want to try and get use less bagged fertilizer, for instance, then it's an obvious thing. And I'm personally doing an IPM decision. I've decided that I will do a straw for muck with a near neighbour. So that allows me to use less nitrogen, which uses less nitrous oxide, which gives my carbon footprint better. Plus, I potentially will get a higher yielding crop. So all that things comes into bear with animals. If we strip animals out of the situation, which and there's a big debate about that going on at the moment in Scotland of how many sort of beef cows there should be in Scotland, and dairy for that matter, because of the supposed problems that they have. But it's really short-lived. Methane is a problem, and they're getting that sorted with genetics. And as I know, they've got that problem potentially covered very soon, and with feed additives, etc., that can be utilised. So, but we need to get the signals. And I'll get back to it again. We need the signals from government to allow us to do that. You can't have. It's all very well to say we're going to have a plant-based everything go vegan, but gee whiz, if you don't have animals there to help along the situation, then we're probably in trouble.
Mm-hmm. And there was another point there, again, the questions are scrolling by, but Rebecca, every farm different, and what key tools we can use to undertake benchmarking. So again, I think the new metrics we have, for me, really do give the potential to address that. So absolutely every farm is different, but a way of scoring apples and pears together and going, actually, I can only do this, but not that, I do think are helpful. And Henry, I was going to come back to you with the question about how people use information to help with their decision making. And I know you've got a survey that you're going to be running to try and pick up on that. So no, have a point there.
Sure. So we recognise there's a lot of information out there on IPM. I'm getting a lot of feedback. And there's a lot of higher level that's provided.
I think it's maybe Ian again. You. Thanks, Ian.
Yeah, so there's a lot of information on IPM. It can be quite confusing, which sources to trust, which to not. And a lot of the information can be quite generic, it can be quite higher level, more guidance rather than advice, and we recognise that. And farmers do as well, which is why the vast majority use an agronomist. So we have a project at the moment in which the data collection period started now, in which we're speaking to farmers and agronomists to find out where they get their information from, who they're interacting with, who they're sharing IPM information from, and whether that be other agronomists, other farmers, policymakers, research institutes. And hopefully through that we can identify some sort of key players, the trusted sources, whether they're organisations or individuals. And once they're sort of put up as a trusted source of advice, if the key messages can be funneled through them, they're likely to have the greatest reach over the networks, whether they be farmers or agronomists. So it's a really interesting point. Where people get their trusted information source, we found as being really critical in terms of the IPM levels that are being practiced. But we must also make sure that there is that up-to-date, impartial, evidence-based advice to provide that information to whoever's going to pass it on to whoever needs to recognise that change on ground.
That's, yeah, I think, like I say, that the sort of piece there around scoring and helping people forward is really important. And I want to go back to your point, David, about risk and what you see the benefits of IPM, because there are. So in some ways we can reduce the risk to the system by making it more diverse and using resistant varieties. But yeah, in season, the decision to reduce or replace a spray carries a risk. So, I mean, how would you define the benefits of IPM? Rather than, I feel we're giving it a negative branding by talking about risk.
Let's go with resilience, I think, is a better way of talking about it. I think, yes, there is risk. Whenever you make a decision to do or not do something, there's a risk involved in that. We're making a prediction about what's going to happen. And so you might be right, you might be wrong. I think these tools help us make better decisions. Again, they're not going to be perfect, but they are better. And I think the benefits to growers are really, if you look at the last few seasons, I think you mentioned at the start, Fiona, such a massive challenge in terms of growing a crop, whether that is because it's been wet through, it's dry. This season's been both for us further south than you guys are. And how do you really know where your risk lies when you've had an extremely wet period, then an extremely dry period, then an extremely wet period again? How do you make a decision on what's actually in that crop from a disease management point of view, pest management point of view? It becomes really challenging. So the more we can reduce that risk, spread that risk down, or take that risk down, and with the rise of things like resistance, obviously we are battling that in a number of different fronts at the moment, whether that's flea beetle, whether that's Mysis persicae, whether that's septoria, rust, all of these things. We need to stack our advantages as best we can. And that's what I see ICM is really. It's stacking advantages. And the more you stack, the lower your risk drops, so that the end point of crop protection is doing its least job, or is doing as much as it possibly can, and you're more likely to get success from it. But I think that is the way that I view ICM, is that kind of stacking of advantage. And I think that's what's valuable to farmers. And it might not just be the traditional, pest, weeds and disease. It might be varying your genetics meets some of the problems. Varieties respond differently to dry weather, very wet weather, the way in which they're drilled, seed rates. So there's a whole benefit to having a spread of risk, I suppose.
No, that's a nice way of phrasing it. Yeah. Caroline.
Can I, just to add to that, I mean, I think the key is resilience and robustness in this space, because, if I look to many of our members that no longer use insecticides, it's because they have built natural capacity in their hedgerows, in beetle banks, in field margins, and all of that has not only reduced costs, but it has actually built resilience within the natural environment, the farming environment. And this is where having that basket of goodies in terms of, right, this has worked or it hasn't worked. Yeah, I do have to take a little bit more of a risk, but the more technology that we have to recognize the diagnostics of those elements of risk against background of rain and sunshine and dry pile, etc., the better it is. And I think, we've seen a real drive in this space over the last 5 years, without a doubt. And I think that's, it is a delight to see, all the benefits, the natural benefits that come from building that natural resilience, but utilizing technology alongside it. And there's cost savings, there's the actual feel-good factor, and of course about making, building that really robust resilience within the farming system itself.
No, I think some nice points there. I like the stacking advantages phrase, because if history's taught us anything, it's the reliance on individual tools. Then we break the chemistry, we break varieties. So keeping that there is key.
Can I come
and
in?
Maybe to get a practical slant.
Yeah, well, that was what I was coming to be fair. I mean, just on a running thing that I've got at home just now, it was mentioned earlier about blends of varieties, and I had two winter barley varieties, and one was a BYVD resistant and one wasn't. So in my little head, I went, yeah, I can handle this. I'll just mix them in the drill, which I did do. What I didn't realise when I mixed them in drill is that they didn't mix. And you can see them to a line, and one's a 6-row and one's a 2-row. So you can guess one's about that much higher than the other ones. And everybody's going, what on earth are you doing, Andrew? Well, it's my IPM. And it got tongue wagging. It got people thinking, because I said, well, the blends will give you a certain percentage more of a yield. Nobody's really quite believing that one yet from me, but it's a live one which I have done. It should have worked better because it should have mixed in better. You have to pick your varieties probably better than I did, but it's a live one which I've done to stop me, or allow me to take a calculation that I do not need to spray for BYVD. So it's a living practical thing that you can do this coming season if you wish, which just might save a spray, save an operation, and be something you can say that you've made a decision on.
Yeah,
and record it as well. I mean, and I think I alluded to this earlier about recording these things, because everything is recorded, and I'll get grief from Ian. I mean, it's extra burden of paperwork. But that's where I think maybe David's alluded to some apps coming on the go that we can make that decision, and it's recorded and zapped straight into our laptops or whatever that records that non-decision as well. That you haven't done, which is, I think, more important than just about anything else. So really practical things like that, which I'm sure are on the go. I've got an app which for my health and safety with all my vehicles on it, and I can at any second can go into my app and record. Say it's got a broken light in a trailer or something. Bang! It's done. It's recorded. It's in the cloud, and it also it emails me back a day or two. What have you done about it, man? Have you sorted this? Oh God, no. On you go. So I think. Something very similar to that could be done for IPM solutions. That's practical things in my little head that seems to be the way forward.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, because I was going to ask you where you felt, some of the new technologies might sit with farmers.
I'm highly excited about the new tech. I wish I was It's 40 years younger. They're really,
Insert your
really
own
great
number.
stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. The high-tech stuff coming through, I think, is beyond probably what we're thinking at the moment. There's things there that we don't know about. I think David alluded to that. But, and the small robots, for instance, coming through that can do the weeding for you without chems. Fantastic, absolutely amazing stuff coming down the line. Hugely expensive, of course, but so was colour TVs, and everybody's got them now. So yeah, we've got to be embracing the new tech, the high tech, and the stuff that we can't even. I was speaking to my son about jobs and stuff the other day, and he said, "Dad, his son, who's 8, probably the job that he's going to go to in 15, 20 years' time hasn't been invented yet." You know, those sort of things are the stuff that we just haven't thought about, which will come down the line. But we do need to embrace them. We do need government help to point us in the right direction. I get back to that one again.
Mm-hmm. No, and that maybe Ian's made a point in the questions there again about that balance of not overburdening farmers with red tape, but at the same time being able to show that we've made positive decisions and the things that we've omitted. So I think this is one that we all need to keep talking about, but it may be that that's where, you know, help has to come in the future.
Yeah. I don't think we can get away without recording anything. It's just not going to happen, but hopefully tech will help us to record it. Be smart about it.
Yeah.
I would stress that it doesn't need to be complex, some of the technology we use. You know, as a business, a year or two ago, we took a decision that all our agronomists should have access to a scouting app so that they can input decisions on the field, because we felt that recommendations weren't a good way of showing the decisions we actually make on farm, because they only track when you decide to apply a product. And so we now operate a scouting app which our growers have access to, so everybody can share what they've done, what they've seen, when they've seen it. You can put in cultivation, so you can really, it's relatively simple. It's not high tech particularly. It's just sharing information and keeping a record of it really is what's the key element.
Yeah.
And the reality is, if you're not carrying out an operation, you're saving time there, you're saving money, and it's what the Kiwis call, clean hand days. And though, that's a hard one for many farmers, actually the reality is often those are the ones that probably pay a very big return, just thinking occasionally and recording and stopping and reflecting.
That is a very positive note to finish on. That's been probably one of the fastest hours of my life, and well aware that we have hardly scraped the surface of IPM, but really grateful for all the questions there, and obviously to you as panellists. That was a great discussion. The link to the feedback form has gone into the Q&A there, so somebody had put their own numbers in. It's over to you to go into that feedback form and get the information about the basis and the Roseau points. I would point you in the direction of the expo piece of the Arable Scotland website now. So that's your chance. People will be manning their booths between 2 and 4. I need to work out how to get from this room into the next corner of the marquee. So do take part in that. And then there's follow-up Arable Conversations at 4 o'clock. So at 4, it's soils and rotations. So lots of common themes, I think, from the IPM session now. And then Ken Loads is leading one on deriving the benefits from carbon later on. So again, thanks to all who joined, and particularly to my panellists. Thanks all. Goodbye.
Thank you, Fiona. Well done.
Thank you.